Today I'm talking to Hon Mun Yip. Hon Mun started his career in telecom, where he built a strong foundation before making the leap into private equity and mergers and acquisitions. Over the years, his work has taken him across Asia, and now he's focused on something deeply meaningful to him, which is advising and growing companies in the food innovation space. Long before trends like Beyond Meat were on the scene, Hon Mun was already working on food innovation in China, and he'll tell us a little bit about that story when we have the session. Hon Mun is also a father, and he feels a deep responsibility to make the world a better place for his kids, which is partially why he's passionate about helping the food industry. He's particularly focused on alternative proteins, and this includes cultivated meat, plant-based options, and precision fermentation, because he believes that these are the key to creating a sustainable future for the food ecosystem. Beyond his work with CEOs, Hon Mun is dedicated to sharing his knowledge with the next generation. He speaks to students often, and he's also, as he'll tell us, a professor in the business school in Singapore. But at the heart of everything he does is a simple yet powerful goal, as he talks about it, which is to give consumers better, more sustainable choices for the future. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Hon Mun Yip. Hon Mun is, he started his career in telecom, and now he's working in the private equity space and investing in food businesses. And we're super interested to hear today about how you got there and what you're doing. For me personally, it's a very interesting space, how people make this career transition. So really happy to have you here. Welcome.
Well, I'm really excited to share what I have since you come highly recommended. So like I said, I'm Hon Mun, and I'm currently an adjunct associate professor at the National University of Singapore Business School. And I run the family office. I provide coaching and consultancy services for individuals and corporates. And I started my career at multinationals like Motorola, Nokia, and Microsoft. And during my tenure at Microsoft, I received an offer from my client, who is also a prime minister, and to join his family-owned business. So this company was later acquired by Temasek Holdings, a Singapore government-backed private equity fund. And it was the largest acquisition in Thailand at that time, 1.88 billion. And I think it's still one of the largest, if not the largest, for foreign acquisition. Now then, over the next 15 years, the new shareholder started shifting my focus to M&A integration before I even know what M&A integration is all about, so that I can make sure that their financial targets are achieved. So I became a turnaround specialist, a problem solver, and at the tail end, a quasi-government official in China.
Oh, wow. That's quite a story. There's a lot to unpack there. Can you tell us how a little bit, I mean, that's how you made the connection and the transition, but can you reflect a little bit about the difference between what you do now and what you did as a corporate corporate person, right? Like, what do you think is interesting? What are the differences, the challenges, and so like how you feel you're leveraging your background and your learning? Because I always find it interesting to meet people like yourself who have made this transition and kind of like a multifunctional operator out of something that was quite traditional to start with, right?
Yeah, I think now that you asked this question, I think I have to kind of share a little bit of details over those 15 years, right? So those 15 years are not with one company, even though it is with one shareholder. So the acquisition consists of multiple businesses. So the big ones, the first one is a telco. And this is one of the most memorable because when I first joined, I was pulled in because we lost the iPhone deal to our competitor. And then I led the whole Bangkok team to successfully pivot to outperform iPhone with, at that time, a very little known device called BlackBerry. And Thailand was the only market at that time that beat the iPhone. So
in BlackBerry.
In BlackBerry.
I remember using the BlackBerry. I had a BlackBerry when I was in business school.
That was the coolest device out there. But imagine when we lost the iPhone, because iPhone is something everybody knows as in Southeast Asia, and this is the first. This is kind of the first or second iPhone, and it was a crisis. And I just arrived. The owner introduced me to XCOM, if I believe, and said that this will be the guy to solve this crisis. I was like, you should have told me earlier. I could have just not come over. But I decided, okay, since I'm here, let's do something. Because after 15 years working with all the big corporates, I mean, it was pretty good life, but I don't feel that I'm really contributing. I don't feel that I'm moving a needle. I don't feel, satisfied. So I kind of like, okay, I took the opportunity since they made me the offer. How often do you get offered by a prime minister? And this is one of the largest telco in Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
So I think that first year kind of established my presence in Thailand.
Hmm.
And next thing I know was after 7 years living in Bangkok and working there, we grew a new business unit. I was hired to handle the transition from analog to digital. We are all
Hmm.
moving to mobile data, and the existing team has challenges making that transition. So they pull somebody from Microsoft to come in, and there's a bit of a background because I sold them 10,000 units of the first Windows CE phone, and the owner said you better come and fix it. So that's the background. So,
Yeah.
but jokes aside, we grew a new business team from a two-person team to a
Yeah.
business that generated revenue of 10 billion baht. So at that time, it was about $330 million a year after
Wow.
7 years.
Yeah.
So then I was told to go to Beijing to stop the financial loss of a satellite business. It's part of that acquisition from the family. I was the 10th person to be sent to Beijing.
Yeah.
And this is not Thailand. It was a
Yeah.
project initiated by the Prime Minister of Thailand and the President of China. And the satellite company faced tens of $1 million in losses and an all-time low stock price. So,
Hmm.
uh, well, my shareholder wanted me to go stop the losses,
Hmm.
and we did it.
Yeah.
Me and the China team recovered nearly $100 million cash, and then we secured a large satellite deal from the Chinese government, and saw our stock
Okay.
price increase ninefold during those 4 years living in Beijing.
Yeah. I've done some restructuring work in Europe. I mean, there's
Uh,
a legal aspects of that which are
oh yeah,
challenging from an
oh
employment
yeah,
perspective.
oh yeah.
Is I've not had experience like that in China. Is China also quite restrictive,
Uh,
or did you
the
have
the
freedom?
the I saw, well, on hindsight, I saw opportunities rather than um, disappointment, put it this way. I was a 10 person. So
Mm.
the first reaction I have was that, what have I done wrong that you have to send me to Beijing, right? I was enjoying myself. I
Yeah.
brought in a $330 million annual revenue type of business.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
guess, there was this little thing in me that said, hey, life is short. This looks like a great opportunity since you have nothing to lose. Let me go
Mhm.
try it.
Yeah.
So I did it, and now when I look back, I say I'm glad I did it. I mean, it was challenging. It was challenging at all aspects, but we did it. Not only
Yeah.
did we recover the cash, and I literally told the board, I said, don't back out because satellite is a what was that? What is it called? It's a deal that would not allow foreigners to enter the market. So when we have the landing right, we are the only one out there. I said it's a pity. I mean, now that we kind of handled the finance part of it, we stopped the losses because we literally sold it to somebody, and
Mhm.
let's go in and do it the right way. And so that's what I did, and we got a 200 odd million, close to $300 million high throughput satellite deal from the Chinese
Mhm.
government.
Awesome. Wow, that's
Yeah.
great. And so, I mean, then I have to say, then now you're in the food space, right? Like the food space compared to that might seem a little bit, I mean, certainly different, maybe smaller, maybe more fledgling. Like, what do you think? What are your
No,
impressions? I
I,
also came into food from
yeah.
other industries, and there were a lot of adjustments that I had to make in terms of my expectation of the speed
Yeah.
of change and innovation and things like this.
Yeah. In fact, I kind of like think that is even bigger than a satellite. I mean, a satellite is a satellite, and there's limited in capacity what you can do, but the food issue crosses generations, and I have a story to tell because I got kids in that,
Yeah.
basically
Please,
educated
please.
me.
Yeah.
So what happens was, after the successful turnaround, I got a call from two retired ministers, and one of them was a deputy prime minister, and said, "We need you to go to China to be a farmer." I kind of exaggerated that a bit. It was more like, you're going to be the third CEO in this joint venture between the Chinese government and the Singapore government, focusing on food security and food safety. And I was like, wow, I am very honored, sir, but why don't you get somebody with a PhD in agriculture? We did. And what happened? Well, he couldn't get along with the shareholders. Okay. And then there wasn't a CEO there for 2 years, for a year. So I was a third CEO in 3 years. So because of the work that I've done, they said, well, even though you don't have the industry experience, you know the Chinese, you've dealt with the Chinese, you know the culture, you speak Chinese, so we need somebody there to stabilize the boat before we can get things done. And then we need you to go up there and restructure it so that we can deliver the numbers, our commitment, because it's a joint venture, and the CEO is from the Singapore side, and the chairman from the other side. And the clock is ticking, and we do need to deliver some financial targets. So for 2 years, I was there, rural part of China. Basically, my role is to bring in the state-of-the-art food technology and investors into one of the only 3 pieces of black soil in the world. That's the reason why we have it there. So we got in about close to $300 million worth of investment. We brought in one of Asia's largest pig producer, and a cheese producer from Shanghai. So that was another good turnaround. And that is where I realized how unsustainable our current food production system is. So, and that prompted me to start thinking about, hey, what are the possibilities? Then at the same time, I'm a tech guy just like yourself. 20 years ago, what got me excited is internet, if you recall, and the dot-com era and stuff like that. And I invested very early, but essentially it wasn't that successful.
Well, a lot of people were successful that are very
Exactly.
unsuccessful pretty quickly, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And at that same time, the advancement in synthetic biology shows a lot of promising possibilities. So there are 2 reasons. So but none of these actually moved me to take action until I have an argument with my children, who were teenagers at that time. I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like, "You boomers ruined the world." and I had a bit of a background here because I left them. Remember, I was working in Thailand all this while, and the family is in Singapore. And they were like 4 years old to 7 years old, and I have 3 of them. So when they are teenagers, there's a bit of a guilt in it because I don't spend so much time with them, and I'm also pretty worried that I become irrelevant to them. So when they said something like that, instead of getting defensive, I chose empathy. So I read up, took classes about sustainability and things like that, and I work with nonprofit organization. It's easy that days because nobody thinks too much about that. So you've got somebody with my experience coming in, people love.
The door is open, probably, right? When you're in it.
Yeah, I'm passionate. And I by the way, I also invest. So when there's skin in the game, if you invest and there's skin in the game, you learn very fast. Let me tell you that. So I speak at a conference, and I mentor founders of food tech startups, all this. So I picked up things very fast. And so a pivotal moment came when my daughter proudly pointed out an interview that I had with Channel News Asia, which is like the CNN of Southeast Asia, discussing alternative protein. Her friend's reaction was that, wow, your dad is cool. So that made me realize that I've achieved something meaningful, and it achieved my purpose of being relevant and caught up with all the time that I didn't spend with my kids. So validated by their approval, I doubled down my effort in sustainability. I was involved in the Singapore Food Security Plan in the very early days, and that's part of the plan that we have. We have been ahead of the US and many other countries in approving um, the alternative protein. I joined a
Mhm.
startup, by the way, making breast milk, and I mentored dozens and dozens of founders in this space. I also launched my own VC fund in cultivated meat and co-founded a impact philanthropy fund helping migrant workers in Singapore. So I literally get involved in the E and the S, less of the G part of it in the whole ESG
Mm.
investing. Yeah,
How
so
do you have time for
that's
all
my
that
story.
stuff? I mean, that's how do you split your time between all? I mean, I have some questions about sustainability, but
Yeah.
it just comes to mind. That's a lot on your plate. So how do you kind of
I
manage all those
I
things?
am pretty blessed because after I left the joint venture in China, I worked for a Korean family. They are interested to move their almost a century-old chemical business to sustainable chemical business, and I was helping the owner do the transformation, basically looking at investments, restructuring, and things like that. So I have, and it's in the same space as he's interested. He literally is interested to build a business for the next 50 years for their children to take over from a foundation of chemical to something that is relevant. So green
Mhm.
chemical, biochemical, fertilizers, seeds, all these.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's what we need is we need leadership of major major business controllers that sort of can take the initiative and particularly if you're privately owned, you can essentially do what you want, right?
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
kind of can I ask about sustainability? So it sounds like you got involved in this movement, at least in Asia, pretty early on. Um, in the time that I've been working in and around the food business, the topic of sustainability has grown to almost be like a frenzy, right? Like I
Hmm.
think we're now in sort of our second phase of new companies being started out of this strong interest that that society and investors obviously are acting on. Um, in the early days, when you first were looking at pig farming and cheese production, what is it that struck you as as someone without knowledge of this topic as being quote unquote unsustainable? What were the things that you noticed that you just intuitively thought were not the right way to do it? Right.
Yeah. So when I got into the food business, for example, the modern factory farming,
Mm,
whether it's food or whether it's pig or chicken, one of the things we realize is that the the resources that you use, the land, the water, and the amount of additives, antibiotics, growth hormones, stuff that you don't see when I was young,
yeah.
when the stuff that we eat, and then when I look back and said, what's driving this whole thing, right? It's all about profitability, and that coincides with the last 50 years where uh, corporates are basically focusing on how to produce more at the lower cost.
Mhm.
That part about there's less of in the old days when I go to China and there's still the not so modern farming practices, there's a lot of respect for a balance between the environment and the production.
Mhm.
A good case in point. So I'm part of a panel of experts for a group in Zurich called the Singularity Group,
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of
and
it. Heard
yeah,
of it.
and
Yeah.
they brought in Ricola,
Yeah.
the candy
Yeah, they
company.
make well candy
Yeah.
and actually have some right here, in
Yeah,
fact. Right.
cool. So I was pretty impressed because when the
Yeah.
CEO came and talked about it and said that they spend as much time protecting the herbs at the mountains
Mm,
as much as producing the candies. So
yeah.
the mindset is very different. The mindset, I mean, when I first started, I remember when I was younger, the way they do business is balance, balance the E, the S. So environment, for example, if you are putting things out there and taking it back, you make sure that you can replenish them so that you continue to have a business for a longer term. That's sustainability, right? You're not going to
Mm,
kill the golden goose just to get the golden egg. I think that's the whole thing. And then social,
yeah.
the same thing. The community, the people. In fact, it is very common just 50 years ago or even 45 years ago in this part of the world where an employee has their children got accepted by University of Singapore, Singapore University at that time, the company would fund the education.
Hmm.
And even when they got married and wanted to buy a house, they would provide funding for the first down payment. It was all part
Yeah.
of this whole thing.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was in Thailand, a lot of the companies before PE goes in was that profit that they have is distributed to the employees or these various stakeholders. Well, of course, including the shareholders, but not the shareholder first and then the other way around.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah.
total mindset change. There's no right or wrong. It's just your business model.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you have profit, you should share it with the people that are helping you generate it. And there are different mechanisms to do that. Equity is, I think, it's less meaningful to most people than
Yeah. So
cash.
so when you talk about
Yeah.
sustainability, there's a lot of criticism as well, and people looking at, in the S part of it, the social part was that,
Mhm.
okay, when you have CEOs drawing salaries that are hundreds of times more than what the average worker is, something is not exactly right. So that's
Yeah.
the other perspective
It's a
of it. It's
difficult cycle, I think, to
it's
break
it's
when,
it's
yeah.
about it's all about balance. It's really about
Yeah.
balance. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the Ricola story you tell is very interesting. I think that there are other industries where you have very specifically limited resources. I mean, those herbs that are growing in these particular mountain environments, that's because the environment is very unique and very small, right? Like
Right.
so you have to be careful about it. Other types of products like hazelnuts and walnuts and almonds, I think these industries also face those things where you just can't grow those products in many
Yeah.
areas of the world.
Yeah.
Um, Perhaps there's a parallel there with our normal food production where hopefully if we constrain the resource, then you are a little bit more, you husband it a little bit more. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about on a societal basis, how to create the levers for doing that, because you're right, like the corporate engine is incentivized and structured for profit, meaning that if they can, you know, cut down rainforests to produce more palm oil, even though as human beings they might realize that that's wrong, they're almost forced into doing it because the alternative might be they get competed out of the market and they die
Yeah.
completely. So like,
Yeah.
how do we change that where there's a kind of an even restriction across groups that then force them to take actions? Like, I think that's a big problem, right? So,
Yeah. It's it's complicated because
mm,
it involves in a mindset change. And I think the same thing happens to AI as well. Everybody knows that where we are heading today is like we're driving a car, but the first thing we know is you step on the accelerator and go as fast as you can, because if you don't, somebody is going to catch up and things like that. When we
mhm,
first learned, I borrowed this from somebody I listened from a podcast, was that something is wrong here because remember, if you drive a car, the first thing you learn is how to brake. Then you learn how to accelerate. But in AI,
mhm,
is everybody accelerate because they are worried that they will lose out. And the
mhm.
problem with this, in many ways, and I don't know, is that it we don't know what is going to happen if you drive that fast and you
Yeah.
crash. So same thing. The mindset, because the mindset needs to change.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So what about today's food industry? You've been doing this now, it sounds like for a couple of years. What have you seen come and go? Any thoughts on maybe what the first wave of this has done correct or incorrect? I mean, I when I started our small business in 2017, I always think about Amazon hadn't bought Whole Foods
Yeah,
yet, right? And so
yeah,
like this whole idea of, melding tech and internet and e-commerce and food wasn't there yet. But really, I always tell people that the reason why we have so much innovation now in the food space is not so much because the technology is new, right? A lot of the tech, even around like cultured meat and things, and all these things that have been around for a long time, extrusion, et cetera.
Yeah.
It really has more to do with the supply chain and the distribution,
Yeah.
right? Whereas previously, if you wanted to sell a food product, you had to go through a retailer and
Right.
then you had to compete with the big corporates. Now, you can put a product online, you can get it on Amazon, you can sell it direct to consumer. So the access to the final user is more democratized, which means that you just have more opportunity for more people to bring new things to market. And that I think is the real shift that allowed much of this to happen. And it's not doesn't have anything to do with the tech in the food. It has to do with the
Yeah.
tech of how it gets to the
No,
consumer. So
that's so true.
yeah.
Well, at least I focus on plant-based meat, right? 2019,
Yeah.
Beyond Meat IPO, Stella IPO kind of woke everybody up, including the
Yeah.
Silicon Valley folks. But if you play by the Silicon Valley playbook, there's a certain route everybody would aims to be a unicorn. So when you
Mhm.
have Beyond Meat become one, and then we in Asia was looking at, hey, especially in Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, it's like, hey, we have got something called mock meat that we have been eating for the past 1,200 years. So what's
Mhm.
the difference? I mean, at that time, a lot of us were saying that's just a lot of marketing and positioning, which is great, focus on
Mhm.
protein, and so on. The mock meat and all this doesn't have that, but we have been eating that as and meat alternative for a long, 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 long time.
Mhm.
So if you look at this, I think my experience in .com was again what Gartner's hype cycle has shown. We there's this three or four stages. So the first stage is technology trigger. Basically, you have a breakthrough technology emerges, generates significant interest, and that's the plant-based just beyond in 2019, and
Mhm.
then it reaches a peak of what they call inflated expectations. So early success stories like Beyond Meat and media coverage create this hype or this frenzy and unrealistic expectations, then leading to a surge in investment. Hundreds of $1 million of valuation, hundreds of $1 million in investment, even before they produce any revenue.
Mhm.
Then you fall into this drought of disillusion, which is what the plant-based meat is currently at. And then you will bounce back again. Now, not
Mhm.
everybody will bounce back. Those who survive, those who have real business model and things like that. So if you look
Mhm.
at this currently, or the at the in the within the alternative protein space, you have plant-based meat is obviously in the drought of disillusion, and
Mhm.
then cultivated meat, which is lab-grown meat, it's probably at the technology trigger stage. And precision fermentation is better than cultivated meat, so I'll put it at the peak of inflated expectations. At least
Mhm.
it's making a lot of tractions, getting big food company interested, doing a lot of trials and things like that. It will go
Mhm.
through this cycle. So if we know that it's going to go through this cycle, it's almost like four seasons, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
darkest winter that you have, spring will come one day. It's just when.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think it's a good perspective. Do you have an opinion or a preference about when you get involved in an industry? I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
or how in
yeah,
that kind of a macro cycle? Obviously, you're probably making individual choices if you're an investor, but
yeah.
what's your preference about how to get involved in those macro cycles?
So I was like all of us in the beginning, when I got attracted to plant-based meat. And of course, I invested emotionally because it's purpose-driven and stuff like that. But I learned a lot. And in fact, I learned a lot from the traditional investors. So that's good for me. So for example, right now, right, I've got so many requests and said, why don't you invest in this and that? I thought you're pretty passionate about helping the industry. I said, yeah. In this investment winter, what is the couple of important things that the founders need? In this investment window, what they need is how to survive. How can they
Mhm.
meet the demands from the existing shareholders? Because a lot of the founders now are under extreme stress because almost like overnight, from growth at all costs, and suddenly they have to start laying off people, they have to start cutting costs, and the investors, especially the institutional funds, wants them to produce profit and revenue almost immediately. And they have, like, especially first time founders, is like, I don't understand. I'm puzzled. It was just yesterday, a year ago. So I think I've gotten a lot of requests as a coach to help them, to help them in terms of their mindset. How can they survive this winter? And there's this part about not familiar in laying off a significant number of staff that they have. Some of them are actually friends, put it that way, as well as a lot of them are actually running out of cash.
Yeah.
So how do
And
they
then
handle
what about
this?
what about their capital structures as well? I mean,
Yeah.
again, when you have a capital structure that's built on a lot of future expectation, you have investors, at least in my, observation and experience, that give money, but also then want you to spend it. And what they're really
Correct.
looking for is that big market inflection. And if the market's not there, they might just give up, or they're not patient.
Yeah.
Investors are usually the ones, as you said, they're saying like, I want to go as fast as possible, otherwise someone's going to get ahead of me. But they're usually not right in timing. Directionally, they might be, but timing they often get wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, so let me share with you an example, right? So recently I worked
okay.
with two food tech founders. They all come from the same region. And it was one of the biggest region for plant-based meat. But both has been very successful in alternative protein business. Then until recently, when the
Hmm.
investment winter hits, right? They wanted my help. How can I meet the tens of $1 million of sales target given by the investors? Otherwise, they will not fund my next round, and they're running out of
Hmm.
cash. So founder one engaged me as his coach. And over the
Hmm.
6 coaching sessions that we have, we explore possibilities, mindset shift, things like that. And 9 months later, we celebrated success, $1 million sales order, not a lot, from Europe instead of the region. And the client was very amazed because during all this time, all we did was just asking questions, having a conversation, did not talk about problem solving. Now, founder two doubled down, so his property, but depleted the funds in about 9 months' time, and then have to close shop and losing
Okay.
tens of $1 millions from the investors. So in times like this, it's not about more money giving to them, but the remedy is actually looking at how the founder themselves could actually use this opportunity to grow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What would you give as advice to somebody founding a new food company, has a decent idea, market not necessarily defined, but so much of getting a new product off the ground, any consumer
Yeah.
product, is distribution, and that costs money and marketing and things like this.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really difficult to bootstrap a business
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah.
having seen some of those kind of fallouts of that wrong part of the cycle, what would you give to somebody starting with a brand new clean slate? How to start, how to get going, right?
I don't know if I put on in the past, when I put on my hat as an investor, I'll get the standard question. But right now, in times like this, I'm gonna say, why now? Why are you launching this now? What do you expect out of it? I think that those questions are actually quite important, because if it's a calling inside, if it's a purpose, you know, um, or do you have what it takes to go through all these challenges? Because it's going to be very challenging. But then if you ask me, I've been through some of the most challenging times in my life. It's all about the mindset, and are you able to focus on what is important to you and then move on,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
I was a 10% there to turn it around. What makes me so special? Nothing. But timing is good, though, if I look back, because the shareholders, the board has a lot lower expectation And one thing when they took me, I was saying like, look, I'm pretty happy in Bangkok, for example. Now you send me to
Mm,
Beijing. I love Beijing, by the way. But I want to
mm,
say one thing. I will deliver. I won't say I'll do my best because some of the shareholder doesn't like to say you do your best. They just want to say you deliver. So I'll deliver.
mm.
However, I'm not going to do something that I've seen before because it doesn't make sense. If I do the same, I won't have a chance of success. I'm going to do something you have not seen before. I'm going to stretch the basically the boundary, but I won't violate any law, and I'll come back and communicate as much as I can. But I need as much support from you as possible. It will be something you have not seen before.
Yeah, so then they're in really uncharted waters, so it's
That's
difficult
right.
for them to
I-
form an expectation versus what they get. I think those such types of situations, it's hard to find people that want to go do a hard thing, right?
Yeah, if
Like
you
turnarounds
ask,
are hard, right?
no, no,
So,
correct. Correct. Daniel, you come from that industry. You probably know, right? Um, there are a lot of smart people. There's no lack of smart people who can think a lot better. But when it comes to executing something when it's not according to plan, and in life, nothing is according to plan. You
Mhm.
need somebody who is adaptable, somebody who is resilient and very focused. Not many people are willing to do that. And those people who are willing to do that, they may not have the skills. And those people who have the skills, they don't even know they can do that. So we, in many ways, people who do that are very this by chance, accidental or whatever. That's my own reflection. If you ask me, would I do it again? I'm not sure. But right now, I'm doing it again. You just mentioned when we first started, right? We could
Yeah.
go. I actually put up my hand and said, yeah, I would like to take this company, this private equity has bought because the owner, which is about has been running this for the past 30 years or so. The children do not want to get into this business, so they bought it over, but they're going to keep the legacy and the branding. So I like
Mhm.
that part because there's a purpose in
Mhm.
doing this. Because to be honest, a private equity comes in, what do? They're going to slash, they're going to do stuff. But I like those who do it with a little bit more of purpose. And that purpose
Mhm.
being legacy, that purpose being you don't have to maximize profit. It don't have to be one single dimension. You can actually combine both financial returns and doing good at the same time.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that will be meaningful. And then I may not have the youth and the energy to do it all by myself. I start scaling by that's what I'm teaching sustainability at the business school and parting these skills to young leaders as a coach. So it
Yeah.
becomes a Avengers game, yeah, not a
Yeah.
Captain America or an Iron Man game, right?
Yeah. So what about the young people? I mean, I'm not so young myself anymore. What do you think about that generation that's kind of coming out of academia, right? Like where, you're at a time in your life where you sort of are given free license to think about just things and ideas and new ways of doing things. I see it here. I'm not so involved in the startup scene in Switzerland, but I see it a lot here. They have a great university system. They have a lot of innovation coming out of the country,
Yeah,
but they also partially because of the place we live in, they haven't really seen the hard side of
yeah,
business, right? Like
yeah,
of how do you make a
yeah,
business out of something? Just because something is a good idea or a good product doesn't mean that there is a business environment that can accept it, right? And yeah, I think that it's very different than the way that I came out of university, which is the idea that you go someplace and you learn from a company or a corporation or a consultancy, and you don't try things yet on your own because you want to get your hands burned, with on someone else's dime. And now you see people really wanting to go headlong into this type of stuff at a younger age, and some of them are obviously successful at it. I was looking today, like somebody just took over a bankruptcy case for Red Lobster in the
oh yeah,
US.
I
The guy's
I was on
35
that.
years old,
Yeah,
right?
I know. Yeah, and he has the same
I-
similar background like you, and he's pretty
yeah, I mean,
passionate.
like, yeah, he's a private equity person. Nothing to say that he won't be successful, but when I was in my early 30s, that kind of thing was pretty rare. And I
Yeah,
think now you're
that's
seeing
true.
more and more young people kind of, forego all of this corporate learning and long years of experience and just say, I'm going to try it, right? And I think it's an interesting environment. Like, what do you see
Yeah.
coming out of universities and students, and what do you think is good about that? What do you think is maybe a caution about that mindset? Right?
Well, I think there's a slight difference for those young people out of Singapore education system, China, Thailand, and Silicon Valley. But there's commonalities because the next generation cares a lot about climate change, animal welfare, health. My what my personal belief, and I help them quite a bit, is to really look at what is their purpose, where
Mhm.
is their passion, because one of those we see for whatever reason is a lot of them come out, they decided that they want to make money, and I
Mhm.
think they will be successful in making money. In fact, they can make lots of money when they're very young, even before they hit 30s. But the problem we have seen a lot is that, is this sustainable? Are they truly happy? Would that fire keep burning? So I would normally, if they get my advice, is to help them find their passion. And a lot of times they may not. And then focus on that passion as a driver to get what they want. Money will come in naturally. So the
Mhm.
focus is the other way around. Because
Right.
I work a lot with high net worth individuals, second generation, founders who sold their business at early age. This is in a peer learning
Mhm.
community. And a lot of times these people are not necessarily happy, even though they have got the wealth. We thought people who has the wealth would be naturally a lot happier than those who don't. But there is
Yeah.
always a balance at a certain point. You cannot not have wealth, but you need to have a certain part of it so that you can meet most of your basic requirements, and then you start looking for happiness. So I think if the nice thing about alternative protein, climate, plenty of opportunities, challenges, issues to go address. So what is it that you really want from this? And then from there, but doing business, doing a startup is still pretty tough. It's the basic business um, foundation still needs to be there. You need to have a good product. You need to know what you're doing. You need to make sure that it's profitable and stuff like that. That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think you need to really have a fire. Someone once told me that
Yeah,
one a startup mentor or something here in Zurich. He said, a lot of people get to be entrepreneurs either by choice or because they're forced into it.
yeah,
And perhaps being forced into it may be more of a lever, right? I mean, that's one thing, and I think that's one thing in societies, particularly as they become more successful and wealthy, people look to create safety around this situation. They
yeah,
look to create a situation where what they don't have to worry. Oh, I have my job, I have my thing, I have
yeah,
my income, I have my education.
yeah,
Then I'm therefore nothing's going to happen. And I think sometimes just realizing that like that's just impossible to create, right? Because you can still get sick, right? Like you can still have a family member that, has a problem. Like there's all these things that can happen to us because we're still human. And, creating an environment where you lose this sort of hunter
yeah.
mentality that we have. I mean, we're still just animals, right? Like, I mean, that at the end of the day, we're adapted to kind of fight and compete in many ways. And trying to eliminate that aspect of our psyche seems strange to me, right?
Yeah, I
So,
like what you just said. You just reminded
yeah.
me, yeah, there's still this animal instinct and DNA in us. Probably would take another 10,000, 20,000 years to eradicate or whatever it is, but we still have that. In fact, um, is the you know for the founders, I like to find founders who not just purpose driven but also hungry,
Mhm.
because there's a purpose, so they are hungry to take action to achieve that purpose. And even if you can give them all the wealth and all the tools that they have, maybe you shouldn't give them too early. Give them only when
Yeah.
they need it, because the adaptability and resilience is, especially in investment winter times like this, is the one that will basically distinguish somebody who can make it until the spring comes, or somebody who cannot.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like raising a child, right? Like you can't give
It
them too
is.
many things. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
helps when I have a kid. You're totally correct. It's like
Yeah.
raising a kid. I learned a lot from
Yeah.
my kids, by the way, and I learned a lot from raising the kids, and I applied that when I quit corporate world into a family-owned business in a totally new cultural world. It's just human. It's just dealing with human.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I also wish I would have had children younger because I think I also learned the same thing. It also puts a bit of pressure on you, right, to be responsible for
Yeah,
somebody
yeah,
else.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so true.
Um, what about do you see differences in, the Asian situation versus the rest of the world in the food ecosystem? Like, you think it's obviously it's different, but is there, maybe, earlier on the development curve, it's more diverse? Like, what do you think is interesting about maybe the perch that you have out there in Singapore and Asia versus, US, Europe, et cetera?
Yeah, yeah, very good point. Yeah, good question. The I think they are both opportunities and challenges as well. Like in Singapore, the government, we are a small country, the government is very clear that food security is a big issue. And because of that, it drives the regulatory, I would say, they simplify the regulatory approval process.
Mm.
And we ended up being a leader, at least in the early years until the US steps in, but the market is not as huge as the US. So in I think in the food technology space, regulatory issues is a big issue.
Mm.
Consumer acceptance, consumer awareness is also another one. You look at in the US, I think um, investors now are kind of holding back because there's this conflicting news about some of the states are banning cultivated meat even before the cultivated meat is in the market. So
Yeah.
that will slow down the development in this area. So then the opportunity comes actually is in the culture, because food is probably one of the very few products that is kind of entangled into the experience and the culture that we have. Because you can't, there are certain areas when we come up with a piece of meat, you can, one of the things we learn is we can't tell what the consumer what to eat. We should respect the
Mhm.
culture that they have, because if they have been eating this type of meat, they will continue eating this type of meat. We got to change the taste profile for
Right.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is the other thing that investors didn't realize, right? Is that,
Yeah.
you can decide to take an Uber versus a taxi pretty easily, right? Like you just decide to take a new one and you have an experience, and you're like, that's better. But food, even if you like a food product taste-wise, even if you believe in what it's doing, it's very difficult to change the culture of eating because it involves a lot of other people, your
Yeah.
family, your friends, the
That's right.
restaurants that are around you. I notice this all the time when I go to the US. I try to eat healthy. I like the diet I'm able to access in Europe. I like the way I can determine what I eat. I'm happy about it. When I go to the US, I find that, of course, if I'm at my parents' home, we cook. But if you're moving around, you're kind of like confronted with the options that are available to you, like in a
Yeah.
restaurant or in an airport. And despite the fact that there's all this hype about health and sustainability in the US media, I don't see in the 15 years I've been living outside the United States a massive change in what's offered to me
No.
in the food service
Yeah.
case. Like
Yeah.
I really find that, and that must be tied up in all of the influences that the consumer has on the decision that the restaurant owner is making, et cetera. And that's very difficult to break. It takes long generations of time to
You
to
you you
overcome.
you're
Yeah.
you're right. My
Yeah.
generation is going to be very difficult to convince my peers to take up all these novel foods. I think my children's generation will be a lot easier. because for us, the piece of braised pork that my mom cook, that something is in my mind, and you can't replace it with anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And we talk about fresh ingredients and stuff, but the younger ones, they're pretty happy to order stuff that is ready to eat, heat it up, and then they eat it. So different
Yeah.
generation, which is why it's important. Right now, my focus is actually educating, raising the awareness of novel food at maybe the teens, 12 to 18 years old, because
Mm,
ultimately it will take a while, years, if not decades,
mm,
before the novel foods, cultivated meat, for example, to be mainstream, to be
mm.
affordable and easily available. And they are the one who is going to make the purchase decision and consume it, not people like us.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we got to start very early,
Mm.
be transparent, show them how this thing is produced, and they care about the environment. So it's just nice. But until it becomes affordable and commercially available and regulatory approval, things like that, we got to keep trying and raise the awareness, and they become our best ambassador.
And maybe not try to go too fast, right? I mean, you have to feel the
No,
market
yeah,
too, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And one
So,
thing again, we learn it the hard way. Do not tell them what to eat and what not to eat. What we are
yeah.
offering for novel food is choices. We are
Yeah.
offering you choices. If you decide you want to continue eating that, go ahead. But then now you have an extra choice. You don't have to worry about the price point and stuff like that. And there's a lot more benefit. But you decide what you want to eat. And who knows? At the end of the day, it could be today I feel like eating this. Tomorrow I feel like eating that. That's choices. It's all about
Yeah.
choices. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agreed. Listen, this has been super interesting and like for me, very engaging. I love talking about these kind of long-term evolutions, and it's great that you have such a reflection on a already successful career, varied career. Now you're in a new one. That's fantastic. I really thank you very much. It's been great talking to you, Hon Mun. This is I hope we can stay in touch. This
Yeah.
is interesting. Yeah. So,
I love to take up that suggestion that we go do something with a private equity and stuff like that. Let's do that. But
yeah. Sounds cool.
thanks
Yeah.
for raising the awareness for the entire industry.
Absolutely, absolutely. And have a great day and thank you very much.
You too. Thank you.